Hello, my name is Shehryaar. This is Suriyanah, and today we're joined with Sally Freedman.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Could you share a bit about your background, where you're from, and what led you to pursue a career in sport management?
Certainly. So a little bit about me. I was born in Scotland. I grew up in England, in Brighton. And I went to Australia in 2007 as I received a scholarship to study a master's in business specialising in sport management. And from there, I started a career working in sport. I worked for the AFC Asian Cup, which is a football tournament in Australia in 2015. I worked for Melbourne City Football Club as head of fan engagement. I worked for Wellington Phoenix in a similar role as a professional football club in New Zealand that plays in the Australian A-League. And I worked at the Commonwealth Games in Australia in 2018. And most recently, I spent 4 years at UEFA working in marketing and communication.
What initially sparked your interest in football, and how did that evolve into working across major football organizations and global tournaments?
Okay, so I come from a football family. Both my late mother and my father love football, and I've got 2 older brothers. So mum's from Scotland and she followed Rangers, Glasgow Rangers, and dad grew up in North London and followed Arsenal. But when I was a baby, we moved to Brighton. So Brighton became my team from the age of 2. I followed them, Brighton and Hove Albion. And I played football with my brothers in the park, in the garden. But I was very upset as a 7-year-old when I asked to play football at school. I remember vividly asking the PE teacher, can I play football like the boys? And I was told, no, Sally, you can play netball or hockey. Football is for boys only. And I was actually punished because I rebelled and I went to play football with the boys. And that playtime or break time, I was told to stand on the line for 15 minutes. And I think even then, as a 7-year-old, I fully understood that that wasn't fair. And I was upset and I was crying and it didn't make sense to me. And I think that sat with me for a long, long time. Hence my career in sport, in football. I love it, but I felt already that it wasn't fair and I wanted to do something about it.
Were there any pivotal moments or personal experiences that solidified your commitment to advocating for women in football?
Sure, well I think the last answer I gave was certainly what sparked it. And when I went to study my master's in Australia, my research project was to understand why women or girls didn't have the same opportunities as boys when it came to playing football. And that was my application for my scholarship. And then I ended up doing a research project on that topic. So I think from a young girl, it was in me, and then as a student doing a master's, I still didn't have the answers, so I tried to find them, and then most recently penning the book.
You have navigated a male-dominated industry. What have been some of the biggest challenges you have faced, and how have you overcome them?
Sure, so unfortunately a lot of sport organisations dominated with men at the top, certainly manager level and above. We often see there isn't a gender equal, there isn't a balance between men and males and females, at the top, and therefore, certainly most recently in my career where I've been in senior positions, I've been the only female in the room quite often in meetings, the only female around the table, the only female on the pitch playing football sometimes, and it's difficult. And I'm a resilient, strong, independent woman, and I thought when I started my career in football that it wouldn't be a problem. I was naive. Few people warned me, Sally, watch out, you're going into a world where there's many male, pale, dinosaurs at the top. And I said, I'll be fine, I've grown up with football, I know lots about football, I've worked in football, I've written about football, I've coached football, I'm a fan of football. But they were wrong. Sorry, I was wrong, and they were right. It was a really hard environment to walk into, and to face the challenges, I tried my best to speak up, and sometimes it felt like I was talking to a brick wall. Unfortunately, you were listened to, but you were sort of then shooed off to the side. Okay, Sally, yeah, no problem, we'll make a note of that and we'll address it in the next meeting. And then you never heard anything. And then you bring it up again because nothing changed, and then nothing would happen again. So it's been frustrating. And I think my most recent medicine was writing the book to try and get some of that frustration out.
What was the most difficult part of bringing your book, Get Your Tits Out for the Lads, to publication, and what motivated you to push through those obstacles?
The hardest part of getting my book published, well, it's the first book that I've ever written. I'm a writer, so communication's in my DNA, but I'd never written anything longer than a university project. So when I received the contract to write a book, I didn't know where to start. I really didn't have a clue. How am I going to do this? Can I do this? How do I go about it? And I'm fortunate that I have a cousin that's a famous children's author. And I called her and said, help, I've just got a contract to write a book. I need some advice and tips, and how does it work? And she gave me some great advice. And I didn't realize at the time that it takes an army to publish a book. It's not just the author. There's the publisher, there's myself, there's the editor, there's a lawyer, there's a designer for the front cover, there's a photographer. There are many people involved, the printers, to get this on the shelf. And I think it really, the light was shone on that issue when we were trying to get the front cover organised. And it's obviously a very important page to get out there and to be right. But I had a disagreement with the publisher. They wanted a happy-go-lucky Sally on the front wearing a dress in high heels. Whereas I said, no, the book isn't a happy-go-lucky book. It's serious, and I feel trapped, and I want the front cover to showcase that. And I had many pictures taken, and the editor, the publisher, the photographer, the designer, and me, we all had to pick our top 5 images, and there wasn't one common image amongst any of us as to what was going to be on the front cover. So that whole process took 3 weeks just to get the cover signed off and done. So that was one of the trickiest obstacles, and that happens about 6 months before it's out. So you're trying to write frantically, but also the cover needs to be out because you can promote it for pre-orders. So yeah, there was a lot of things I learned along the way that were difficult, and I think the biggest learning was how many people are involved in getting a book on the shelf, and how difficult it is to get the title right, to get the back cover right, to get the paging, the spacing, the references. There are so many things. So next time you see a book in a bookshop here in Switzerland or wherever you're going shopping, appreciate the blood, sweat and tears that have gone into that, because it's far from easy.
Since publishing your book, have you encountered any surprising reactions, either positive or negative, that stood out to you?
Thank you. Just after I published the book, it was published in Australia strategically just before the Women's World Cup kicked off there in 2023. And at the conclusion of the World Cup, the world saw sexism personified when Luis Rubiales, the former president of the Spanish Federation, kissed Jenny Hermoso on the lips. And as a result of that incident, suddenly my book and me were thrown into the spotlight. And I was quoted as a gender equality expert. I was asked to complete interviews, television, radio, podcasts daily for about a month to talk about sexism and how important it is. So that was lucky, serendipity timing. Thank you, Louis, or gracias, Louis, I should say. But it made me frustrated, like, why did it take that incident to get people to wake up and realize what I've been talking about for years, and I've written a book about it. So it was great. That's the only good thing to come out of that scandal, was that sexism was in the news headlines for 3 weeks, every single day around the world. People are still talking about it now. And only recently, as I mentioned in the presentation earlier, he was found guilty of sexual assault. So we've seen accountability and punishment, which I think is important, which will encourage other women to speak up.
The title of your book is provocative and powerful. What inspired you to choose it, and what core message do you hope readers take away?
Sure, so Get Your Tits Out for the Lads. The title, the story behind the title, is revealed in the first chapter. It's from 2004. I went to Portugal with a group of friends to watch Euro 2004 as a fan. There were 4 boys and 2 girls in our group. The boys went ahead to a bar, and myself and my friend said we'd meet them there later. And a couple of hours went by, and we decided to go and meet our friends. And England were playing France that night in Lisbon. And we didn't need to look at Google Maps. We could just hear the raucous fans, the noise, the colour. And we went across to this bar, or tried to go across to this bar. But what we quickly realised, there was, between us and our friends, there was a huge road with traffic, crazy traffic, and it was going to be really hard to cross the road. So we stood and paused, trying to figure out how are we going to cross this road safely to get to our friends in the bar. And at that point, 2 lads in the bar saw us and started singing and pointing, "Get your tits out, get your tits out, get your tits out for the lads." Excuse my tone-deaf singing. And very quickly, 2 became 3, became 4, became 5, and the whole bar, probably 200 men, were singing and pointing at us that chant, "Get your tits out for the lads." So it's a true story, that's what happened. At the time we laughed, we smiled, we found it funny, but if we reverse that and we think of 100 women in a bar, they wouldn't be singing a similar chant to men. So why is it okay for men to sing it to women? And I can just say thank you to those lads in the bar because you gave me my book title.
From your perspective, what are the most pressing systemic issues facing women in football today, both on and off the pitch?
I think on the pitch, we've recently seen 2 prestigious matches held on pitches that are in a very poor condition. One was the UEFA Women's Champions League quarter-final, played on a mud swamp in Madrid, and similarly there was the League Cup final in England, played on a sandpit. Now, men's football matches of that prestige would never be played on such poor quality surfaces. So why is it okay for women's matches to be played? So I think on the pitch there is still a long way to go. We are seeing progress, it's not all negative. For example, Arsenal, the women get to play at the Emirates and fill it, which is a huge stadium in London. Brighton are investing in research to see what surface should be used for women, and they might change when they build their purpose-built stadium for women only. They might change the surface based on what the research showcases to decrease the likelihood of injury, so there is progress. But I think on the pitch, yeah, as I said, it's not treating the women who are professional athletes as you would the men, and that's where we need to go, and that's one of the biggest issues. And then off the pitch, I think the gender equality imbalance in senior positions is a huge issue that needs addressed. And sadly, across many sporting organisations, there are only men at the top, and there's no diversity of thought. And I think that's an area that we need to improve. We need to encourage women to apply for senior positions, and we need to give them the education and support when they do get those senior positions that they end up staying in them and not leaving very quickly.
If you had the power to implement one major change in global football governance to support women, what would it be and why?
I think here the biggest thing that I can do, and that what we should all do collectively, is education. That would be the biggest change I would make to governance in football. What do I mean by education? I mean rolling out a gender equality program for all leaders in sport, in football, across the world, to showcase what gender equality is, why it's important, what the benefits are, what casual sexism is, and what we can do to address it and fix it. Because even though I've penned a book about some of the stories that have happened to me, and it might sound like an attack on boys and men, I don't feel that, and I think that it's as a result of growing up in a world that isn't equal, and we have gender stereotypes, and it's subconscious sometimes, and it's casual sexism, and it's not the fault of men necessarily sometimes when these sexist incidents happen. So I think education would be the biggest change I would make.
And finally, looking ahead, where do you envision women's football in the next decade? And what role do you hope to play in shaping that future?
Despite some of the negative stories I've outlined, I am very positive and optimistic about the future. I hope that women's football is seen as normal, is on television more than it is now. In England, it's wonderful that they showcase matches on the weekend on free-to-air television, but not every European country is doing the same. So I hope in 10 years' time it will be normal for young kids to turn on the television and see women playing football. Certainly when I grew up, I didn't even know it was an option because I couldn't see it. I didn't know that women played, and they didn't, generally. They had to play in boys' teams. So I hope that changes. And that stadiums are full, and that there is huge investment in the women's game, in the infrastructure, in the stadiums, in the sponsorship, in the broadcast rights, because we've got a huge gap to try and fill. So that's where I see football going in the next 10 years. And what's my role within that? Well, I talked about education, and one of the reasons I wrote the book was a tiny hope that maybe I would get a little voice, more of a voice than I had prior to writing the book. And that's what I really want to be involved in, is educating and running those programs that I've described, talking to students like I did today, talking to adults, talking to young kids, and trying to showcase gender equality and why it's important.
Thank you for having joined us. Everyone, please make sure to follow Football for Impact on Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn. Make sure to check our website, and make sure to check out Sally Freedman on her website as well. Thank you.